Seat. We're ready to get going. My name is David Brennick. I'm the pastor here at the National Presbyterian Church, and it is our pleasure to welcome you again to hold this spring symposium from Friendship Place here at the National Presbyterian Church. This we call very often our church home, and it's a home that we want to share, not only with those who are members of the congregation, but all the guests who come for various reasons, and there are many guests throughout the year who share our home with us. And when you do have a home, it's remarkable what you can do with it, and when you don't have a home, it's remarkable how difficult life can become. So we are grateful that we have a church home, that we can share it, and that we can have this discussion this evening, and that we are partners as a congregation with Friendship Place. One of the ways that we are involved in particular is with Aim Higher, and it's been a wonderful addition to our own life together as a congregation in the past couple of years, but involved in other ways as well. So we welcome you warmly, trust that you have what you need, and that this will be a truly valuable evening together. So to those who are presenting, to those of you who are present, we welcome you warmly. Thank
you, Dr. Rennick, for this wonderful welcome, and for your support and that of the church all through the year. We really appreciate our partnership that keeps on growing. Thank you for welcoming us to this wonderful venue for a hidden challenge, homelessness among youth and young adults, our annual symposium that is organized by the Education and Advocacy Committee at Friendship Place. Thank you to all the volunteers and staff who made this happen. A very special thanks to all the donors in the room. We know there are many of you tonight. We appreciate your support, and it's through these wonderful donations, that your generosity, that we can make many of our programs happen. So you do make a wonderful difference all through the year. I also would like to thank those of you who are attending away from Stone Hall, streaming online on friendshipplace.org, or following us on Twitter, where our handle is @FriendshipPlace. Join us while we're tweeting during the event using the hashtag #YoungAndHomeless. And to all of you, do like us on Facebook during the year. Thank you. Friendship Place develops innovative, person-centered solutions to empower individuals and families experiencing or on the brink of homelessness to rebuild their lives with the involvement of the community. Together with our many partners, we are working to end homelessness in Washington, D.C. and beyond, and we know that it is possible by building systems that are strong enough to catch people on time, and we're doing it with your help. Tonight, our thoughts go to the young people living on the streets of our city, and to all the communities across our nation that are seeking effective solutions to engage youth and young adults living in homelessness. We hope that this conversation will help draw a path forward for our city, so the nation's capital may lead the way in ending homelessness among youth and young adults everywhere in our country. It is a great pleasure and a true honor to welcome our wonderful panelists, and I want to thank them all for being here tonight, and our moderator, starting with Ayanna Moore, who has very generously offered to share her personal story with us. Ayanna, you participate in services in our Welcome Center division and also at Before 30, our new program of the Aim Higher division. Darla Dean is an attorney and serves as policy director for the National Network for Youth, the nation's leading advocacy organization for youth experiencing homelessness. Deborah Shore is the executive director and founder of Sasha Group's Youth Network, one of the largest youth services organizations in the city, and helping young adults and their families discover their own abilities to transform their lives. Jermaine Hampton, our very own Jermaine, is the director of the Friendship Place Aim Higher program, which has become a leader in job placement and rehousing in the DC metropolitan area. Its new program, Before 30, empowers youth and young adults through flexible, person-tailored approaches. And finally, we are delighted to have with us for the second year in a row Ray Suarez as our moderator. Thank you, Ray. Ray is the host of Inside Story on Al Jazeera America, and prior to this, you were the senior correspondent on the PBS NewsHour and the host of Talk of the Nation on National Public Radio. Please join me in welcoming all our wonderful guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Michel, and thank you all for coming. And even though we're not in church itself, there is a similarity. The front rows are very empty and the back rows are very full. So for those of you who are members of the congregations that are partners in founding Friendship Place, that part will feel very familiar to you. As someone who's been working in the news business for my entire adult life, I can tell you that my business plays a big role in putting a face on homelessness in the society, so that when you ask people to think of a homeless person, they're far more likely to think of a man in his 30s or 40s, or at least an adult, than to think of a young person, 24 and younger. We tend to think of those members of our community when homelessness strikes as members of intact families who are experiencing family homelessness rather than individual homelessness. The idea that there are anywhere between 150 and 200,000 young Americans who are on their own and homeless would come as a shock to a lot of people who perhaps associate this more with the economic problems in the society, high rates of adult unemployment, problems of returning veterans have certainly gotten a lot of coverage in the wider community, but we don't tend to think of teenagers. And the assignment tonight is to really talk in a way that apprises you all of what's similar and what's different about this population, its needs, the institutional responses to their problems, and how it is you push back against youth homelessness. What's different about what's in the toolbox? What's different about the needs of young people who are now, tonight, across the country, there will be young people on the street who have no place to go. So we'll start with a quick whip across the panel. And Darla, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Hello, my name is Darla Wardine. I'm the Policy Director at the National Network for Youth, and I'm going to be kind of having the national lens of the scope and federal policy. I always think it's the boring part of what you hear, and everyone else is far more interesting than me. So it's good that I'm limited to 3 minutes. So in terms of the scoping the problem nationally, no one's really invested in intensely good data around youth homelessness. I'm going to talk about just some of the numbers that are used and kind of the more recent numbers that we think are pretty severely low. So one of the numbers used is that, it's estimated that 1.9 million in America experience homelessness, even just for one night, young people. And that's an old number, and we're hoping to have it updated, but that's a number that is commonly used. In one night in 2013, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development does a point-in-time count. And in one night in January, 46,924 unaccompanied homeless youth were counted. That includes minors and 18 to 4-year-olds. Also, last school year, the U.S. Department of Education counted 58,000 unaccompanied homeless youth in U.S. public schools. And also looking at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's numbers, the largest percent of unsheltered homeless persons among all the populations is minors. 59.3% of the under 18-year-olds that were counted as homeless were unsheltered when they were counted. And that's in contrast to 30% of all homeless populations. When put together, only 33% were unsheltered. So there's a big disparity in the number of young people who are actually sheltered in the U.S. that were counted and found by HUD. And there is a street outreach report that was done that asked young people, so homeless youth who were on this, asked them why they were on the street and not in a shelter. And the number one reason that the young people stated, and this was done in 11 different communities across the United States, and the number one reason across all communities was the lack of an available bed in a youth shelter was stated as the reason. So the current nature of the system that we have in the U.S. to respond to youth homelessness it's varied. So it includes street outreach, because it's really important to try to meet young people where they are and to tell them about available services and to build a relationship, because most young people who are homeless are either kicked out of their home or they run away, and their first thought isn't, oh, I need a program to help me. They're adolescents, and they're really trying to figure out how to survive and what is the next thing to do. So as soon as you can connect a young person to service would be available to them, then you're really decreasing the chances that they would become a victim of crime or human trafficking or languish on the streets. So street outreach is really important to building a relationship. And then the next is crisis intervention services, usually done in a residential term program, and that really focuses on the intervention. If it's possible to reunify the family and the parent, or the youth and the child, or to identify another family member that's safe for the young person, then that is the first best choice. And then for young people who can't be safely reunified, to be able to put them in a transitional living program or a supportive housing program so that they're not on the streets and they can engage in services to help them succeed academically and vocationally, and then go on to kind of live a normal adult life. And then across the board, these programs provide counseling and trauma-informed services, education, and vocational. So it's all very youth-centered approach. And so there are currently over 400 different programs across the U.S. that are providing different types of services to homeless youth, both in communities and in cities. And currently what we have is not the need. As I had mentioned before, with a very high percentage of minors that were counted as unsheltered. Also, when you're looking at the 18 to 24 population that had counted, a very high percentage of them were also unsheltered. And right now, federal funding for homeless youth programs is very low. There's one targeted program that funds only runaway and homeless youth services, and it's currently funded at $114 million for all homeless youth in America, which, when you scope that to the number of homeless, is very low. And when we're talking about what progress has been made, I think the big progress is convenings like this. A lot of people are really starting to become engaged in youth homelessness, wanting to learn more and wanting to get engaged on the issue. And I've seen it in the work that I'm doing. A lot of people are calling me and want to get involved. And so that is the big progress that's going to be made. And hopefully what's next is the solutions, which is to increase the resources for homeless youth so that the 400 existing programs can scale up to capacity so that no young person is turned away because of a lack of a bed. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Now we'll hear from Deborah Shore from Sasha Bruce Youth. Okay. You want the mic or you want?
I can do this. I would prefer to stand because I like to lead, right, with everyone? And thank you so much. Thank you for doing this, Friendship Place, and thank you all for being here. I think it is such an important thing to care about youth homelessness. I mean, it's an important thing to care about homelessness, to care about what's happening to our friends and relatives and people that we know. But what we also know is that young people who are homeless when they are young, if that continues, they are contributing to adding to the number of chronic homeless people that we have in our society. So it is sensible in every way to put some energy towards focusing on what to do to stem the tide, to make the difference, to help people to change their lives as early as possible. And that is something that I think has gotten a lot more attention, but it certainly needs a great deal more. So my work has been for 40 years to provide services to young people in the city who are homeless. And these are young people under 18, these are young people that are 18 to 24, these are young people that have young families. So we see the gamut of these young people and know that what we can do when we have the opportunity to stabilize them, bring them into a circumstance where they are getting the kind of services and supports that they need for developing life skills, the outcomes are fantastic. But what we also know is that what we're doing is serving a very small population of this group of young people. And so I want to tell you something about the scale and scope in DC, which I hope will help for you to find it compelling, help us to make some changes here in the city. The picture of homelessness of young people in the city is very hard to get a picture, a true, clear picture on, just as it is nationally. There are no real extensive numbers. But there are some things that us to know something. One thing that we know, anecdotally and in every way, is that most of the young people are not being counted in the usual ways that adults are, because they do a lot to keep themselves invisible. They are couch surfing, they are trying to not become known to the public agencies, they are trying to make their way as a teenager or a young adult and look and feel and act and be like all of their other peers. And so they don't identify themselves. They make sure that it's a strength we see, we think. But they go to great lengths to make themselves not be identified. And so when you go to counting, you have to have skilled youth people who know how to contact and be in touch with young people in order to make the connections and in order to then get the information. And this is something that we have done in the city, although it needs to be done again and again for us to be able to really know. But 3 years ago, the DC Alliance of Youth Advocates, of which my organization and many others are members of, did a very extensive study. And for 2 weeks, we went around the city and talked to young people, and what we learned was that there were 330 young people at that time who were unsheltered or who needed shelter. And what this boiled down to was that many of them were connected to some program. However, 40% of those young people were connected to no program. And so we're talking about a pretty substantial gap in our capacity to serve young people. Shortly after that study was done, the city made a decision to cut services and beds to under 18-year-old homeless youth, which are a group that I particularly we've been serving for 40 years. So the beds went from 16 to 5. So since that time, our organization has been turning away between 20 and 25 young people a month. So our numbers have increased. Additionally, and Darla mentioned this, Sasha Bruce was one of these 11 cities that were part of a study that was done to take a deep look at who is on the street and who are young people and what are their needs and what's going on with them. And there's a lot of good information that's come out of this. Unfortunately, the study is not yet officially released, so I can only tell you some things. But the top barriers, as Darla pointed out, were either that people didn't know where a shelter was or the shelter was full. So we certainly need to do a lot better than we have been. We have the many of the solutions for how to help young people turn their lives around. And the pillars that were mentioned before, I will mention again, because I think it's really important to understand that in our city, like in many other cities, there are some features that are going on that are very good and are really turning people's lives around. But we just don't have the scale to make the differences for all of young people. Pillars, as I would see them, as we see them, are that we need to have prevention, we need to have outreach, we need to have emergency services, crisis services, and we need to recognize that not all young people are going to be able to go back home, and so we're going to need to have a place for young people to grow up, and we really want to make sure that we don't have young people who are unstably housed and getting themselves into deep, terrible situations, which are happening all the time. It doesn't take long at all for a young person to be on the street or to be in a circumstance where they are having to exchange something that is precious to them for a place to stay before the spiral towards a person who has many, many more issues and problems and traumas and needs begin. So we really need to do as much as we can to put these pieces in place. And what we have are some of the pieces. We don't have the scale, and we don't have a coordinated system. And some of us at DCAYA and the Washington Interfaith Network and many of our friends and partners are really working on how it is that we envision a larger system and how we then get some mandates so that we have not just a system that has some contracts in place, rather, but to have something which remains and stays. And so one of the things that we've been very pleased about is that the city has... Okay. All right. Well, to tell you about, if I had the chance, was how incredibly...
You will have the chance, but just not all at once.
All right. We have some legislation which is coming, and I hope that you'll come on May 8th and help to make sure it gets passed. Thank you.
Next, we're joined by Jermaine Hampton, the Director of Friendship Place's Aim Higher program. Jermaine.
All right, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to be brief. So, you know, obviously, so my name is Jermaine Hampton, obviously, and with Friendship Place, and we've got this very interesting program that we developed, you know, several years ago, in 2011, really, centered, you know, really just around, you know, helping and supporting the community, obviously. We were responding to crisis, and, you know, we awesome a great program as a result, serving adult, starting off with men and women, right? But over time, obviously, you know, the program evolves, right? So you get more people coming in, get more issues, the population starts to change from like an average age between 40 and 50 to you start seeing 30 to 40, then 20 to 30, and then all of a sudden now we've got 17 and 18-year-olds coming into our door. And we're all about placement, obviously. We're about coupling placement with housing and using those two things in correlation to basically achieve a result, which is self-sufficiency. So with that being said, as Aim Higher evolved, you know, we started having to serve youth and young adults. You know, basically we just looked at the issues and said, hey, I mean, you know, it's pretty clear what we do. You know, we need more innovative, you know, we need more, you know, creative, more innovative, more, you know, programs that are private, obviously, and, you know, really targeted, you know, to really, I guess, put a nice support group around, you know, an individual and push them forward into self-sufficiency, their own terms, obviously. And, you know, for an individual to be truly self-sufficient, what they need? They need housing, they need income. So whether that is in the form of a paycheck, in the form of, making sure that they have their disability, et cetera, et cetera. They need these things. These are just keys. So, with that being said, we kind of blossomed a new program out of Aim Higher, and the program is before 30. Before 30, it speaks for itself. It's serving age group 17 to 29. And basically what we're doing is we're implementing a lot of practices of Aim Higher. But what we're doing is that we're understanding that there is a disparity in the population. So you've got your really vulnerable individuals, you've got your individuals who are seeking and ready and want to work, and they can work, they're able, and they are trying to get housing, whether it's on their own, whether it's with a friend. And we're basically creating a support group, once again, just like we did with Aim Higher, and we're pushing individuals into self-sufficiency. We're stabilizing them and things of that nature, and working with them on their issues, and putting them in a position where they, they have some income, they can get into some affordable housing, and they can gradually rebuild their lives, connect with their families, and really just keep them off the street. And, another thing that we did and that we have been doing with Aim Higher and then now doing with Before 32 is we're preventing homelessness as well. So we're kind of serving both, sides of the coin. So, please give me your questions. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up so I don't get wrapped up. And thank you.
And as Jermaine mentioned, all of you, when you came in, your packet included a question card. We'll be taking your questions later in the program. And they'll make their way here to me, and I'll make sure they get answered. Finally, Ayanna Moore. Ayanna, you got a mic? I'm going to go up too.
Good evening. My name is Deanna Moore, and I'm a current resident at The Haven, which is a Friendship Place transitional housing program for women. I'm 20 years old, and I'm the youngest resident they have ever had. I've been a resident there since December 2013, and with their help, in a very short amount of time, I've dramatically improved the quality of my life. To understand just how far I've come, you have to understand where I've been. I was trapped for the first time when I was 15 years old. I was kidnapped by a man as I walked home from the movies on my birthday. After I escaped, I moved to Battle Creek, Michigan with my parents, and I stayed there with them until I was about 17. At 17 years old, we started having problems and they put me out of their home. This was the first time I considered myself homeless. At the time, I was too young to get into an adult shelter, and I was too old for any youth programs in the area. I was forced into a cycle of couch hopping, couch surfing. I'd fallen through the cracks in the system. When I turned 18, I finally got into a shelter. There were 2 30-day shelters in town. The system was that you go back and forth between the two, 30 days here, 30 days there. By my third cycle, I had been banned from one because I had been attacked by another resident and fought back. Yet again, the system had let me down. During this time in between, I was forced to sleep where I could, when I could, be bused in abandoned houses, under bridges and garages, on people's back porches. I had been reduced to living like an animal. I compared my life to that of a stray cat. I decided to move to a bigger city in hopes that they would have more resources available for me there. I panhandled the $12 for a bus ticket and ended up in Lynchburg, the capital, at a Volunteers of America shelter where I received little to no help at all. Of the month that I was there, I only saw my caseworker once. During this time of struggle, I had been befriended by a man who always seemed to be there for me when I needed him. I thought nothing of it. When I finally had enough, he made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. He wanted me to move in with him so he could help me since I wasn't getting where I was living. As soon as I left the shelter with him, I noticed a change, that I made a big mistake. He was a pimp, and he had been conditioning me to trust him for over a month at the time. The abuse started as soon as we made it to his house that night. Sorry. When he decided he couldn't deal with me anymore, he then sold me to his cousin in Tennessee. And then again, from there, he sold me to a pimp here. If you're asking yourself why didn't I run, I was escorted each time with no cell phone, no identification, and no money to purge me from running. I arrived in Union Station at 10:46 a.m. on April 15, 2012. 3 months later, I was arrested, and it was the best day of my life. It brought about a tremendous amount of change. Fair Girls showed up to my trial on my behalf and showed the prosecutor that I was a victim, and they viewed me as such. A short time after I successfully moved away, or a short time after I had become involved with Fair Girls, I successfully got away from my trafficker, was employed with Fair Girls, and I was living a normal, healthy life with a host family that they actually found for me. After I left the host family, I moved into the Haven on December 8, 2013. Since then, my life has improved even further. I now have my GED. I'm attending school full-time at the Aveda Institute of Cosmetology. I'll be graduating 2015. I can say with absolute certainty that if I hadn't received the help that I did, I could not have made it where I am today. These two organizations not only changed my life, they saved it. Thank you.
Across the presentations, some of the drivers of youth homelessness have been touched on. But just moved over and then moved on to other things. What are the main causes, and how do they differ from the drivers for adult homelessness?
There are a group of things that drive youth to become homeless. It is conditions within a family that create a lot of stress and strain, so that could be poverty, it can certainly be drug abuse issues, it can be employment problems, and many other things that contribute to families being under a great deal of stress. Kids who are young people that are having difficulty in school can often be a great stressor. We see a large association there. Additionally, there are a lot of young people and we haven't touched on this, but we have an overrepresentation of LGBTQ young people in our population. And as young people have come out earlier and the larger society has been so much more accepting, sometimes that has created a great deal of stress in families. We see a lot of young people where there has been tragedy in families, where a parent has been become drug addicted, or gets locked up, or dies, and there's older siblings that have been asked to step in and really aren't able or capable. There's a variety of reasons, but it certainly is true that for all of them, there are certain things that have to be in place in order to sort through what is going on and to make the difference with them. And so, we just would argue that regardless of what the stances are, we are open to assuring that young people have a place to come into and be safe and to get the services that they need. It's essential for us to be able to connect with the young people to figure out what's happening. And I guess the other thing that I would say is that I don't know that the differences, with adults are as important of what I would want to say as to say that we are very devoted to trying to make the case consistently that the kind of care and treatment for young people needs to be youth development informed. It also needs to be family friendly. If there's any way for young people to reconnect with family, then we want to encourage that. But for a lot of young people, that is not going to be possible. Or even if it is, they're not going to be able to go home. It is critically important that we recognize that young people are not just small adults. They have particular developmental challenges and issues that we should be paying attention to and be sure to surround services to them that are relevant, that are culturally relevant.
A lot of the literature talks about families and puts a lot of weight on trying to reincorporate homeless young people into families. But is there a screen? Is there a determination? In the case of family dissolution, in the case of physical abuse, in the case of homelessness on the part of the rest of the family, where you actually spend some time, or need to spend some time, discerning that actually going back to family is not the best place for even someone as young as 17 or 18 years old. Well,
yeah, I'm sure Debbie can probably speak to this better than her, but there is a determination that is made. The people who staff these homeless youth programs are social workers and mandatory reporters. So if there's abuse or neglect reporting that needs to happen, it's done, and there's intensive assessment in terms of really kind of getting to the root of what is going on with the young person, and outreach to the parents is, usually mandatory within a certain amount of time for a minor, and it's pretty telling if the family responds and wants to come in to participate in family reconnection services, or they're like, oh, you got them? Okay, good. They can stay with you. So there is kind of the whole gamut of family response versus youth response, and child welfare system will be necessary. And the child welfare system may say the same thing as the parent. Oh, you got them? Good. So there's varied responses kind of across communities and systems with how they work together, families, child welfare system, and runaway and homeless youth programs.
At several junctures during the presentations, it was noted that there wasn't enough help, that the need outstripped the size of the help. But then at other times in the presentations, it was mentioned that the young people themselves are trying not to be found, or trying not to be found by the very kinds of people who would locate services for them, get them into structured responses to the fact that they have a place to be. So, Jermaine, how does someone find their way to you? And are they always people who want to be found?
No, they're not always people that want to be found. I mean, a lot of it is just advocacy. It's making yourself known in the community. It's networking. You know what I mean? If you have enough people working together, essentially, to address a certain issue, and enough people are speaking about that issue, going to events, going to speaking engagements, talking about it and testifying it on the DC City Council, things of this nature. You have service providers who are working in coordination with each other. What happens is, the homeless population and, people just in general, they have networks, okay? And just because an individual is experiencing homelessness or is going through that, whether they're 17 or whether they're 62, they have networks, people hear things, and, though someone may not want to necessarily be found, things find their way to people, and at the end of the day, if enough people are spreading the word about it, if you're seeing it on the news, people watch the news, right? People listen to the radio, right? There's community events, So when you have all these different things going on, that's kind of how people find out about, services like Aim Higher, like Sasha Bruce, and that's how we start, dealing with the issue, and that's how we focus.
And I think part of what leads to the invisibility is fear of what system's going to find them, right? Because the most common system, these young people, that finds them is the criminal justice system, because they are doing what they need to do to survive. And so there's fear of entering the criminal justice system, and there's also a lot of fear of entering the child welfare system. And the runaway and homeless youth programs are much different, because they don't have the power to terminate parental rights like the child welfare system is. So they're often much more effectively able to both engage both the parents and the young people into resolution, because there's no fear of the runaway and homeless youth program taking away their parental rights. They, of course, will make the call when necessary, but it is a different approach to have a community-based organization doing this work versus a governmental organization. So I think that there's a lot of fear based on they don't know all the door options and how to open the right one for them. I think is very challenging for young people.
Ayana, one word that jumped out when Jermaine was just speaking was networks. And in the story you told, you were around a lot of adults who wanted to make sure you weren't part of the network, that there was no way to find out where to be, where to go. And when you were in a new city, a city where you had no contacts, had no friends and no family, that must be just the opposite of the kind of place where you know who's looking out for you, you know where to find the help you need, and so on. Is there no place for a home teenager to just turn up and say, hello, I'm somebody who doesn't have a place to live, what can you do for me?
There is. There is. That is what Sasha Bruce House very much wants to be. A place where any young person at any time of the day or night can walk in and say, I need a place to stay. And there doesn't have to be any kind of complicated reasoning or thinking that prevents them from being safe and being welcomed into a safe space. The problem is that we don't have enough of those kinds of places. And really, that's the only barrier, because there is no reason to not have that kind of welcoming spot for every young person. We simply don't have the capacity at this point. It's not that we don't have the resources, we don't have the way to go.
Why do there have to be youth beds specifically? Why can't you use unused or used space in designated adult facilities?
Well, I think that, you know, one of the ways to answer that is that a lot of young people vote with their feet. And a lot of young people do not walk into adult facilities because they don't feel completely safe. So could there be ways to make sure that all facilities are more youth-friendly? Yes, there could be. But there are a lot of circumstances in which young people, there are young people that I know who have gone to some of the large shelters particularly, where they have felt vulnerable. And it is a different way to provide services sometimes, you know, in broad strokes between young people and adults. We see ourselves as operating in such a way as to make sure that young people are engaged all the time with constructive activities, and that's something that we're involved with them on. Whereas a lot of the adult facilities, as I see it, presume that these are adults who have some capacity themselves, and they are expected to go out. So for instance, a lot of the adult facilities close during the day. For us, that would be something that we wouldn't do because we don't feel that young people are in a position where, you know, that's opportunity for us. If they are not in school and they are not working, work on those issues of, you know, where should they be in school and what kind of training should they be involved in. And so there is a way of creating a program that is assuring that all of the kinds of life skills and guidance and support and protection is being provided.
Diana, before you got arrested, which you said was the best day of your life, was it clear where you could get help and who would help you?
A very large part of control when you're dealing with pimps is isolation, and when you've been involved in it for so long and you break at a certain point and you stop fighting. So at that point, it's a sense of Stockholm syndrome where when he tells you that nobody cares, you believe him. So at that point in time, no, I didn't know that there were places that I can go or who to trust, because in my head, he knew what was best for me at that point. I later learned differently.
Questions are making their way up to the front from the audience. This one from the audience: how can we connect to the juvenile justice system to help youth at re-entry into the community? Good question.
Great question.
I happen to know a fair amount about that in the city because we do a lot of work with young people. And it's important to note that there is a large participation of young people who become homeless who have been involved in the juvenile justice system as well as the child welfare system. And there's a lot that can be done. You know, there's a whole field of youth development that is very exciting, and there's lots of development in it of evidence-based practices, of good, promising practices for working with young people and engaging with young people. And I think that it would be wonderful to see there's a lot of siloing between these systems. Young people go into the juvenile justice system and come out of it, and there is a kind of break in services before they connect sometimes to the homelessness world. And in part, we don't have enough capacity anyway. But there's lots of work that is not really dissimilar at all, that it can be done with young people that are in the juvenile justice system and coming out of it, that could be family focused much more than it is, and that could be helping to identify who it is in that system that is going to be having trouble, at the other end, and making some arrangements before something else occurs. We don't have that kind of overall system in place, but it certainly could be.
An audience member asks, I read that DC homeless system will not unaccompanied youth under 18, and neither will child and family services. Who will take care of these homeless youth?
So, to be screened into the child welfare system, which is what I can speak to, there is a level of abuse and neglect that needs to be found. And being kicked out of your home or being homeless does not rise to the level of abuse and neglect to be screened in to the child welfare system. And of course, every child welfare system is administered differently, but that criteria alone does not screen you in. And what happens often in certain areas, every area is different, right? It's very hard to talk kind of broadly. I know it's DC specific, but often a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old will present with the exact same abuse and neglect situation or family service, and that 4-year-old is going to be screened into the child welfare system much quicker than the 14-year-old. Some systems really view prioritizing taking care of the younger kids and not focusing on the kids who are capable of running away. And so often what will happen, and I know it's been said in DC, is that there's no need to house homeless minors because the child welfare system will take care of them. One, that's absolutely not true. It's not true in DC, and it's not true across the country. So that's why it's so important that minors are included in any homeless funding, any homeless system. Every city in America, federal funding and local funding should support homeless youth services and homeless adult services. And that's really what we're pushing for.
And there are services. If I gave the impression there were none, that is not true.
Yeah, the definition issue.
Yeah.
The homeless, the DC month.
Yeah. You mean during hypothermia? Yeah. Right. So this was a decision on the part of the Department of Human Services that young people who are under the age of 18 would not have a guaranteed right to shelter during hypothermia. This is an interpretation that I think is being questioned. It's one of the things that is clarified in this legislation that I mentioned, because it's not something that everyone agrees to. It's based on that young people should be defined only as part of the family and not separately as a separate individual. And I think it's a very mistaken idea that we would not guarantee young people particularly a safe place to stay during hypothermia.
A question to Ayanna. Would it have been possible to approach you and offer assistance to you when you arrived at Union Station? Do you have any tips for outreach workers who are trying to make that connection to people they suspect are homeless?
At that time, you couldn't approach me. I'd already reached a point in my life where a point in my situation where I decided to stop fighting it and kind of go with it. At some point, you get tired of getting beat up, so you kind of just roll with the punches. If they had approached me at Union Station and told me they were there to help me, I probably would have thought that person was a pimp. So I mean, there are male and female in that world, so it is a really hard thing trying to line between who really wants to help and who doesn't, because there have been times where, people have told me that they wanted to help me and abuse me, use me, and it's just, at some point you stop trusting people altogether. For outreach workers, you better come with some paperwork to show that you are legit, because it is a really hard thing to break through to someone who has no faith in humanity.
Jermaine, when you're working with people who you're trying to get them education and placement, are there a lot of other needs in these clients at the same time that you also have to locate that really have to be provided at the same time as you're doing these other things? That you can't just be the education and job placement guy, but also the person who helps them find the other things that would, untreated and unanswered, make their transition into housing either complicated or impossible.
That's a good question. So I've kind of been in both sides, well, three sides of the world. I've been in the staffing world, I've been in the government, workforce development, employment service side, and I'm in the nonprofit side. And I would say the biggest thing with working with the nonprofit side is you can truly actually help someone. And the reason why I say that is because when I was working for the government, you have to push individuals into certain situations that they may not want to be in. You're really not really worried about what their personal issues are. If their water's cut off, if they have no electric, if they're on the street, you're not really concerned about those things. You're concerned about, how you get them off your caseload. Point blank period. So with that being said, working with a nonprofit, that whole scope changes. When someone walks into the doors of Aim Higher, the 430 program, it's a huge, because when we sit down with someone, we're doing assessment, and we're trying to look to see how we can help someone. And if someone says, hey, my water's cut off, or says, hey, I don't have any transportation, hey, I don't have any clothing, I don't have a resume, I'm displaced. There's several issues that pop up in a conversation when we're talking to someone, during assessment, building a rapport with them, and things of that nature. And what we're doing with Aim Higher before 30 is we're really focusing on their needs first, and we're kind of going as they go. Once we stabilize, the issues that they're going through that are kind of hindering them from employment, once they're stable, kind of knock that stuff out, then we're thereafter concentrating on the placement aspect and things of that nature. You know what I mean? And that really truly is the big difference. And when you do that, sometimes the smallest things that can push a person forward. There's been people that, we've just provided transportation, a great resume, clothing to, and they were able to get a job within 2 weeks. Sometimes it's that simple. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes it's 2 months. You know what I mean? But having the flexibility to be able to work with somebody, actually pay attention to their needs, deal with their crisis, having a situation where you truly have wraparound services, it's a huge thing. And then it's not just Aim Higher, it's not just before 30, it's the fact that we can literally go across the street and you've got a welcome center that has all types of homeless intake services. It has free psychiatric, free medical care. So when you have all of these different things at your disposal, you've got a situation where the participant can't move.
Several questions about homeless youth and the public schools. How do you work with DCPS to identify homeless students? How many homeless teenagers are enrolled in DC public schools? And what services are provided to them by the city? And finally, what should teenagers indeed understand about their homeless peers and anything they can do to help?
What was the question again? Yeah, sorry. So there is a tremendous amount that the DC Public Schools could do and does do in a limited way because they have limited resources to do what they do. And just to be clear, there's a number of young people who they count who are homeless, and they provide some additional services, particularly transportation services, within the schools through the McKinney-Vento Homeless Services Act. And this is wonderful service that they provide, and I wish there were more of it. But one of the things that is true is that a lot of our young people are not counted in that count because for many of them, they have dropped out of school. And the way that you get counted is if your parent typically lets the school know that they are in a homeless situation. So for a lot of the young people, we've been working now for a while to urge the school system to find some additional ways to assure that they're connecting with the young people who are in high school, who are homeless. Of course, the young people that are in any of the programs are being counted. There are a lot of young people who aren't, and so, but the schools do, a great deal to try to keep the young people. We have some very good people in the school system right now who really make an effort to keep the young people in school and assuring that they can go back to their regular school even if they have moved locations. So, I think that there's a great deal more that close connection that could happen around particular young people. Some of the young people we see have been out of school for a long time, and finding good alternative programs is not so simple or easy. There aren't enough of them. And there's been some reports recently about adult education in the city and that we don't have enough of that. That affects a lot of the young people that we see, because for 16-year-olds, if they've been out of school for 3 years already, they're not going to likely be able or really able to go back to the grade that they were in. They need to be in some specialized programming, which of course is the strongest argument for why intervening and getting involved as early as possible makes sense, just to try to keep young people in school and not, losing their time in school is such a critical part of helping them really towards productive adulthood.
In the coverage of youth homelessness, one culprit that comes up again and again is the foster care system. And one of our audience questions deals with that. Should the foster care system be extended or changed to serve older youth? And age out and push out being a big factor. That's a good question.
Yeah, so currently the foster care system should be taking care of the 14 and the 15-year-old. Under current statute, if there is a finding that rises to the level of abuse and neglect, they should be screened in. With the child welfare system, they struggle with resources and capacity and places to put young people. So I think that drives some of their decisions. And there has been, some states have opted in to raise the age for young people who are in the foster care system up to the age of 21. I think the challenge for me in answering the question is that the foster care system doesn't have the best outcomes. Young people who are in foster care, a high percentage become homeless after they exit. Whether they exit at 18 or whether they exit at 21, there's a very high percentage, like 30 to 40%, I think I'll stay with 30, percentage of young people who exit the foster care system experience at least one episode of homelessness before the age of 26. So I would say the child welfare system, they need to do better with the young people they're serving now. So I hesitate to direct more young people to a pretty broken system, but I do think that the child welfare system to do a better job at caring for young people in youth-appropriate ways and preparing them to enter adulthood, which is the entire focus of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Programs. Often the child welfare system, unfortunately, just kind of bubble wraps and warehouses young people in the hopes that they don't get harmed, so that then they're not sued again. And so there's not a lot of independent youth development work that's being done with young people to prepare them that is youth-informed and youth development-informed. And so it's a very different approach than the Runaway and Homeless Youth Program. But I absolutely think that wherever a young person finds themselves, whatever door they find themselves that can serve them appropriately, that door should have the resources to serve that, so that no door is turning them away because they have a lack of capacity, whether that door is the child welfare system or the youth homelessness system. There needs to be adequate resources for everyone.
What do the police do when they find a young person homeless and not committing a crime? That's a good question.
It's a very good question. Well, they don't look very hard, that's for one thing. So if they do, in fact, pick up a young person, they are actually restricted from bringing them to the runaway shelter because of confidentiality. However, we have some very progressive police. I think I saw some police here, and we often have somebody dropped off in front of the shelter, and anyway, because of the decisions to not send a young person back in a situation that's volatile. And I hope that that's also because they understand that it is our interest to be working with families whenever possible, so that it's not as if coming to the runaway shelter is going to mean then that this is a course away from their family. But this is a really, I think that's a great question, because I've worked here for 40 years and I've worked on this issue ever since, because it makes sense to have a connection between the police who are seeing young people on the street and are there also to protect them, we hope, and to not have that connection to a system of service does not make a lot of sense to me, because what does happen is that young people are taken back to families, and there's a lot of pressure for the family to take them back again because they don't want to be in trouble with the police, and then it explodes again very quickly often. So we sometimes find that young people have been have this cycle 3-4 times before it really completely blows up, which doesn't, which really doesn't serve. So I think that it would be wonderful to see a closer connection and a real system of service, starting at the police.
Since teenagers are very peer-oriented, would teenage outreach workers help in making contacts with homeless teenagers?
So this is a best practice. This is what we do. We have outreach workers, and some of them are teenage, and it's a wonderful way to have assistance with making those kind of connections.
Anna, what do you think?
Honestly, I don't agree. I mean, no disrespect, of course, but I feel like when I was homeless in high school, I told no one. People asked, people saw certain things, and you wouldn't know it if you talked to me. I let no one know, not a teacher, no one, because in high school there is a standard. If you don't have this, or you're not living here, or anything like that, like, you're judged. It took a lot for me to get up here and tell my story simply because fear of being judged. So imagine when you're young and you're under all the pressure to be popular and to be a certain way, to fit in. Of course you're not going to tell someone something like that. Then you're different and you're judged. That's just my opinion.
Just to add a little bit, I mean, one thing that I've seen that is really effective with other organizations, something that we're trying to work towards as well, in terms of outreach and connecting with young folks, is doing things in the community that they can relate to. Whether it's music, whether it's the arts, things that are kind of centered around the things that they're already doing anyways, and then you're just opening it up to the public, and then you're using individuals who someone is going to gradually migrate towards anyway. So whether that's an athlete, whether that's a celebrity, whether that's somebody who is very visible, who, anybody, wants to meet or wants to be a part of a certain situation. And these are things that can really help that type of thing push forward. So
I just want to say, and that this brings up that we need to have a lot of different ways of making those connections. And for some young people, it's not going to be a peer, or it's not going to be at your school. It's going to need to be somewhere outside of that. One of the young people that came to the summit the other week was saying that she would hope that in her school she would see a sign everywhere to tell her where to go to talk to someone. That's not going to be for everybody, but it's going to be for some people. And what we do find is on the van that goes out to do outreach, it helps to have a young person. We also have staff who are very capable of making those connections, but it sometimes really makes a difference for them to see somebody who, it can relate to their circumstance. Sometimes is even somebody that they would have known.
Do programs for children in protective custody for abuse and neglect get much more financial assistance than those supporting homeless youth?
So when the mandate for a young person who's screened into the child welfare system, the government has a mandate to care for that young person. And also when there is an abuse and neglect case, there's a legal issue of parental rights. So under the Constitution, a parent has a right to parent their child. So to take away a constitutional right is pretty expensive. There's usually at least 8 people involved with one person in the child welfare system. So because there is a mandate, the money has followed, right? There's billions and billions of dollars invested by the federal government and by states every year in the child welfare system. And as I mentioned before, there is no mandate to care for a runaway and homeless youth, right? There's no mandate unless they're screened into the child welfare system or unless they're in the juvenile justice system. Whenever you're in the criminal justice system, which is also a government-run system, there is a mandate. It's a mandate. It's basic life necessities keep them alive in the criminal justice system, but there is a mandate, and it's not the same mandate. DC made the decision to not have a mandate to house homeless minors during hypothermia. So without a mandate, there's the money hasn't followed. So there's only $114 million that's appropriated to a runaway and homeless youth program federally that's administered by HHS, and then HUD is the other kind of main federal funding source, and they don't make a lot of local decisions that include homeless youth in their HUD homeless assistance funding because they're not required to by HUD to fund certain things for youth in every community across the country. So there's large disparities.
Several questions about governments and funding. Is there an opportunity to advocate for funding until year 2015 DC budget, and what should we be asking for? What are some of the coordinated efforts in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area? DC's voting on more funding, but what about Arlington County, Prince George's County, Montgomery County? Is there a regional advocacy body?
I think there is a regional advocacy conversation. There's not a body. There's not, it's not really come together quite in that way. But I can answer very specifically the question of what to advocate for home. We have developed legislation, and the we is all of the providers, or many of the providers, because Friendship Place and many others are also great youth providers, but many of the providers and the advocates in the city have come together after a couple of years of looking at this situation with some depth, and we've had many conversations with people in the city government as well, and we've come up with legislation, and we are asking for $10 million to initiate a large effort to provide services, to do evaluation, to do account. So we feel that this is a very, very good, well thought out program that would make a huge difference. It's not going to answer all of the problems that it jumpstart a model of services in the city and a model for how you get to a real continuum of care for homeless youth. And there are, I just want to say, I think that there are places in this country that are way ahead of where we are in terms of the service provision and in terms of people being brought together to think through how we make a whole system work. The public, the private, the philanthropic, the advocate. This is what we hope that this legislation will really jumpstart for us. So we would be delighted to have anybody here come down on May 8th and testify to your support for this legislation. That would be something you can absolutely do and be very helpful.
A couple of questions for Jermaine. Can you explain the entry process and general timeline for someone who's interested in receiving services from before 30? Specifically, how long on average does it take to connect someone to housing? And what is the capacity of the before 30 program? How many are being served? How many are being turned away?
Right, so, Aim Higher, of course, has been serving, youth and young adults for, a little bit, and that's blossomed the Before 30 program. So what we've seen with the Before 30 program is there's an interesting split. You've got the, more vulnerable individuals who, it's really needs-based type things going on, and you got to kind of support them in different ways, their mental health issues, and other clinical needs, medical, things there. Then you've got the folks who, are really just displaced, they're on the streets, they're doubled up, hidden, and, they're looking for jobs, they're looking for, support and housing. So when someone comes into Before 30, right now it's a program that we're trying to grow. Someone will come in and basically we're doing assessment much like we do with Aim Higher. And, there really is no time limit. There's no restraint or anything like that. We're more so trying to build a rapport with somebody and really kind of go as they go. Take our time with them and put them in a situation that really benefits them. We're not trying to squeeze out numbers so that we can look good and things of that nature. We're trying to actually truly help somebody and create a permanent solution. So by doing that, you really kind of have to take your time with folks, and sometimes, like I said before, it'll be the simple things, and they can move on as fast as 2 weeks, and they're already in a job and already housing. And sometimes it takes longer, and that's one of the things that's great, about being in the situation that we're in. And in terms of capacity, right now we're serving actively 15 people intensively. Right now the program has 30 individuals in it, and much like Aim Higher, that's how Aim Higher started. But Aim Higher now at this point has served more than 500 folks, in about 36 months, and what we're trying to do is, replicate that with Before 30. And that, accompanied with other service providers in the area, continue to build more person-centric individual wraparound service programs, that are private, with a good mix of, city funds and maybe even federal funds, and, better help the community.
This one's for Ayanna. How would you have liked to have been found long before you were? What would have helped you before you got help?
If I had been found around the time my parents put me out when I was struggling for in the in-between stage between adult and youth, my life would be very, very different. I'm 100% positive. I can say with all certainty because before I was homeless, I was in school, I had great friends, I was living a normal life, I was a cheerleader, my life was very different. If I had been found way back then, I wouldn't be in D.C., I wouldn't have been through all the things that I had, but at the same time, everything happens for a reason. I also wouldn't have been put in some amazing people, I wouldn't be able to speak on the causes that I can, so it sent my life in a very different direction by not being found, but I feel like I was put on the path to where I'm supposed to be by going through this.
Have social media change the way outreach is done? Is anyone using social media to enhance service delivery, to homeless youth have access to social media?
I mean, social media is huge. I mean, in the youth community, young adults. I mean, obviously this new generation. I mean, it's all about social media. It's all about connection. Whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, and there's a variety of others as well. You know what I mean? So making yourself visible, in those types of situations, whether you're marketing it through your actual organization, whether you're having events and you're broadcasting it, whatever you can do to kind of spread the word and build social media, around what you're doing in the community is huge, because you have a much better chance of reaching the individuals that are hidden by using social media as a tool.
Absolutely, and we do some outreach work with using social media, and I know that there are a number of other organizations that are doing this too. It's absolutely what we need to be doing to connect with young people. It's how they're communicating with one another.
Final thoughts before we wrap it up? Anybody wanted to say something that they didn't get a chance to say?
I mean, my biggest thing is just that, Friendship Place, we're all about solutions, and my simply is very simple. I mean, we need more creative and innovative programming in the city. Ultimately, at the end of the day, once you stabilize an individual, they're going to eventually get to a point where they're going to need income, they're going to need housing. Point blank period. Doesn't matter how you cut it, slice and dice it. So all I'm simply saying is that, whatever support you can afford, whether people that you can put in touch with some of these organizations such as ourselves, Sasha Bruce, that are doing this type of work in the community is huge. And, we just need to continue to push forward and, really support, privately funded programs that have innovative models, and targeting, what the real solution is, which is, placement, housing, support, resources, and, really going as the person goes.
Darla Bardine, Deborah Shore, Jermaine Hampton, Ayanna Moore, please thank our panelists. And here's Sally Craig, Friendship Place Co-President.
So I have this wonderful job of thanking people, and but I have someone, Ellen Clifford, who is Ellen and Garrett. Where are you? And Garrett, yay! They're responsible for this tonight, along with other members of their committee. Ellen passed me a note and said that the AIM Hire participants who are here, and especially the youth participants, would like to be recognized and acknowledged. So would you all please stand up so we can see you? Are you guys proud of Ayanna, or what? Yeah. I want to give a special thanks to our friends at National Presbyterian Church, Judy and Clyde Taylor, Joanne Lesser, and their pastors, Dr. Rennick and Donna Marsh. You've been great friends to us. And thank you for all of you who came tonight. If you're inspired by the work that you've been hearing about, we invite you to make a financial contribution. You've got envelopes in your little folders that you were given out. A single, simple act of generosity can cause many effects to unfold. Just look at how far we've come in the last 23 years. When a group of neighbors, generous with their time and talents, came together in a grassroots advocacy effort to find more humane ways of dealing with homelessness in our community. Some of those generous neighbors are still with us and are here this evening. Our Before 30 program is funded by generous individuals. It's not a government-funded program. It is through the generosity of people who've seen the work that we do and want to continue helping us. So that's my pitch. Once again, thank you for coming. One more thing. get in trouble if I don't say this. There's an important gathering next Wednesday. There's a sheet of paper with coming up events. There's a conversation on advocacy that we're conducting next Wednesday evening at our St. Luke's offices, and then our wonderful Friends and Neighbors Breakfast is coming up on May 15th. So if you haven't been, May 10th, May 15th. Okay, phew, May 15th. If you can go site and sign up for that, and we'd love to see you there. Thank you.